are from December as I go down and click and open up the dates.
We're live.
All right, let's roll. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Healing Brothers podcast for another installment. On today's episode, we're going to talk about community violence. Unfortunately, in too many states, in too many cities across the United States, Black people, especially Black males, have been victims to gun violence. And the response that we get from violence and that's caused to us and on Black bodies is it's across a spectrum. And maybe we'll get into that a little bit today. But before we get into that, how are you doing, Sam? What's going on?
I'm good. And nothing to complain about too much. You know, um, not that I can't. I do know how to do that, like anybody else, I guess. Um, you know, it seems since 2020 and 2021, and it might be because we're on a lockdown, is that we uh, been losing a lot of our icons in the community. You know, the last few haven't really been, or at least they haven't been uh, COVID related. That kind of stuff. But still, at this time, you got so many that you're losing. The last recent one is Tesla Tyson. Um, um, we lost her recently.
Yeah,
You know, you know. So that goes a long list of folks. Um, so you know, I think this would be a prime time to hug up on your elderly. You know.
well, we're encouraged not to do that, though. You're not supposed to be
Yeah.
hugging,
Well,
hugging your
when
elder
okay, you
through
know what?
COVID.
That mean contact them. How about contact them? You know,
Love up on them, right?
yeah,
Show them
yeah,
some love.
yeah. Well, it's hard. It's hard in this generation to love up on some of our elderly because you know, um, some of the young people I work with don't even know who some of their grandparents are, right? And so those connections, I think we've lost over time. But what do I know? I just happen to be old, not what they would call elderly, but at what we call retirement age. You know how they be talking about the 60 is the new 40. No, the 60 is 60. You know, new 40. So, I can't. If I was able to do what I was able to do at 40, I'd be a monster, even in COVID. If I would, but all that. So again, take care of yourself, mask up, follow the rules, those kind of things. Um, you know, it appears that at the same time, in our community, because of the structure of the medical systems in some of our communities, that we're not getting access to the vaccine. But the big thing is how many of healthcare workers of color, specifically Black folks, say I ain't taking it. So that so we have all those challenges, and that's just a side note. But that's enough of that.
I think one of the elements of that to connect our topic for today and just what we're going through is that we are in this collective state of grief. And it's not anything different than what Black folks have already been dealing with to a certain extent. It's just been expanded. And what I mean by that is the ushering in of COVID-19 in early March of 2020 has restricted our ability to have access to things. It has restricted our ability to have choice. It's restricted some opportunities. It's restricted our ability to connect with people. We've lost our normal routines. We've lost so many different things that has put us in this kind of ambiguous loss. situation. And then ultimately we've lost people during this time as well. And then to be able to be in this space and then to continue to have that collective trauma of seeing Black people being harmed in many different ways, adds to the layer of stress and trauma that we see. But but is that anything different than what Black people have been experiencing in general, or has COVID just lifted a rug on some of the ugliness that we've experienced? And I think that I don't know if this is COVID related or what, but one of the things that we've also seen has been an uptick in violence, both intimate partner domestic violence
Yes.
and community violence during this time. And it's got a lot of folks scratching their heads, city and public officials, police officers and chiefs, community organizations and community members. It's like, what in the hell is going on? So what are your thoughts on, is this a grief related thing? Is this contributing to our toxic stress and our traumatic stress that we have? Like, what do you see is going on?
Whoa. That's a good question. It's just, I think it's just like everything else that we've seen in dealing with this era of COVID, um, and social justice, well, especially the era of COVID. It's almost like any issues that were already there, we're doubling down on, right? And we never really got a handle on or understanding fully. I mean, there's folks out there who think they have, and there's some thoughts on that about community violence. We do know that we live in a society that was technically built on violence. Violence and power and control and those kind of things, um, go along with that. But unfortunately, for a part of our community, especially with some of our young people, um, doing bad things to other people for their entertainment has been a problem for a while. And you don't normally get anybody to say that. You know what I'm saying? And what I mean is that, um, well, I mean exactly that. It's like a distraction. It's fun. It's something to do. Um, um, there's a story to tell. And I think the question is, if what I'm saying is true, one is how we got there, right? Two is, now that we're there, what do we do, right? And the efforts that we have used to combat violence, and particularly community violence, um, how well they're working. Um, and I think part of the piece that I'm starting to hear about it a little bit more is all in where does, generational, uh, historical, but especially generational trauma and trauma in general fit in that equation. And I think sometimes that we talk about it, but I don't know if we dig into it enough to really get an idea on what might be the best practice for now. But we got what we call best practices for now, and you know, we're sharing them around the country. Those kind of pieces. But one of the things that, one more common best practice for at least community violence is this whole, new piece around, um, intervention in, emergency rooms. Uh, that's caught on around the country, right? And we had the opportunity to have, a couple of the, early leaders on that at our conference, probably about 5 years ago, out of Prince George, Maryland, I believe. Was doing the, research and stuff off of that. The same thing out of Philadelphia. So basically, um, it ends up being, more uh, a trauma response after effect. Okay, so so the here and now. So what do we do uh, to what do we do on the front side? I think that's the piece I think gets real critical and real difficult for the community because it's easy to talk about the front side and talk about systems and what systems are not doing, but it's much more difficult to talk about as a community what do we have to do differently as a response to the total community trauma. That make any
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think one of the reasons why it's difficult is because we haven't been encouraged to think about these issues in multiple different directions. And what I mean by that is I feel like we've been encouraged to think about what others are doing to us instead of thinking about that and what we're doing
Yeah.
inside, and then also thinking about the solutions are not going to just be outside of our community. It's going to also be solutions inside. We have to shift culturally in order for this to stop. Like this, it has become such, you talk about pandemics and epidemics and things that go on and take captive over culture. The community violence that we've been facing, I mean, we've been seeing this for 35, almost 40 years of this consistency and at this detrimental level, and it has changed and morphed over time. And we can't just say that it's only white supremacy and racist cops. Like, it is that and plus other things within inside of the community that many of us don't want to talk about because it forces us to look at how we've contributed to the problem, or sometimes even our helpless, some of us have helpless mentalities on what we can do about it.
Yeah, and I and I understand all that. But the other thing you bring up the 30, 40 years, and in a few different times on this during this podcast over the last several weeks, we bring up the issue around the crack era. I I we I don't know if we're I think we're slowly starting to understand how devastating that era was to our community, right?
Right.
And I know, and part of it is there's been so many devastating things that's happened to our community that we have in our minds recovered from or adapted to, right?
Right.
Um, but the crack era um, um, really um, made you came up with when you are young people in an environment where you don't feel safe with anybody inside, even within your community, and you
Right.
don't feel safe in your house, right? There's a new I think it's uh,
Netflix, the
Netflix.
documentary. Yeah.
Yeah, it's produced by a brother, and I forget his name. I meant to look it up beforehand. That really takes probably one of the most honest looks in terms of the community at crack, right? It
Mhm.
really lays out how we got there in terms of government involvement, but it's one of the few that really took a full honest look and really spent some time on the significance of crack having an effect on black women,
Yep.
right? Black women and children, because we've been talking about that for several years.
Time.
Uh, uh, because the thing is in spite of what we want to believe, maybe as some of us men or even other individuals in the community, the glue of the community, uh, due to our ability to adapt or whatever, it's been black women. And when
And it continues to be.
that glue got attacked tremendously, when we talked about crack cocaine, you had the glue and you had the support with black men, who were, probably working multiple jobs or whatever, the best they know how. And so we're talking about being attacked by multiple levels,
Correct.
right? Um, so you got men who around the 70s, which was like it was almost like the perfect storm,
Mhm.
right? The late 70s, Factories started closing. Factories started closing. We got Vietnam coming to an end. Got brothers coming from Vietnam with some drug problems. Again, little or no investment during that time in the inner city. All the investment going out to the suburbs, and you spend a bunch of money during that time on buying war equipment and spending money on war to the point where we not only do we spend money on war, we go around the world looking for a new war to spend some money on, right?
Mhm.
And and then when you can't get the money, we find another a way to get the money. So yeah, well, as long as you let us send you the guns, whatever you send back on those planes is fine, right?
Mhm.
And then if you look at, and ironically, it's interesting how entertainment kind of mimics our world. You watch them old gangster movies, and they say, well, you get the one gangster who says, well, we can do we I don't have no problem doing booze, and I don't have no problem doing prostitution, which brings up a whole nother thing about how we feel about our women, okay, and
Mhm.
how we don't protect them at the level they need to be protected from us. You know, um, in the movie they would say, I don't that drug thing. I don't, because you see it in the Godfather. I don't want to be involved with the drugs. It brings up too many problems. And then you hear somebody say, well, long as you make sure you sell it to the moolies. You know what the moolies stand for?
Mhm. Black folks.
Black folks,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's a classic part of the movie where he says, as long as you keep it with them, they're animals. So they
Right,
don't have souls anyway, I think is
right,
part of
right.
that quote. Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't in just that movie. See, it,
Right.
and so we basically watched that play out. Right, we got all this
Yeah.
drugs coming in here. When you got a drug dealer says, "I had so much drugs, I didn't know what to do with it all. I didn't even know what to do with it all."
Mhm.
Right? You know that's something, right?
Right.
And so we during that era, and that was like the tail end era of the high rise system in like places like Chicago, one of the most segregated cities in the country. Which there's even a new video about that as well on, I
Mhm.
think, Prime, if I'm
Mhm.
not mistaken. Um, the perfect storm,
Right.
right? And crack comes in, and now you can make thousands of dollars a night, right?
Right.
And you're a kid, and you got to hustle, and then they come up with a set of ways to supply treatment and some support in terms of how to get a job and those kind of things. We end up with more jails. So now you say the biggest problem is, well, because we always get blamed for the problems in our community. We
Right.
always get blamed.
Right.
Biggest problem is men in the lives of their children and fathers and all that. And then you lock up all these adults in prison,
Right.
right? And so, and crack, man, crack was interesting because it would sneak up on you before you least expect it. And
Mhm.
and and so now you got women who are doing using crack, or you got to fend yourself from your uncles, your aunts. You couldn't trust anybody in the neighborhood. You 10, 12 years old, you still a child in this over crazy environment. So now you scared all the time. Now you got a gun, and now you got access to money you ain't never been access before. And now everybody else wants that money. You can't trust the police because they're in the game too. There's a result for that,
Right.
right? There's a result when babies cannot trust its community to the basic level. Then on top of that, we end up the beginning of what we call the rape culture,
Mhm.
which goes right along with that. You
Mhm.
know, we go right along with, as much as black men, we don't want to be seen like a piece of meat. basically treated women like a piece of meat,
Mm.
right? And so now you got this rape culture, and again, the rape culture it started very early. So we got young boys being exposed to the stuff they ain't got no business being exposed with young girls,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to fight through that. And we ain't even talking about the lives we were losing around AIDS and all. I mean, all this stuff is going on,
Right.
and so you have all of that kind of callousness starting early with young folks. And
Right.
those young folks are like 40 years old now, 45
Right.
years old.
Exactly.
So we're talking about, as you say, 30, 40 years,
Yeah.
right? And some of us were able to, parts of our community was able to recover, but there was other parts of our community that wasn't able to recover. Other parts of our communities that some of us in the community kind of forgot about because we don't want that memory,
Right.
right? And so now you got a community that want to talk about how do we come together in unity and as a community when nobody really trusts anybody in the community. How do you do that, right? Until you show somebody something different. I
Yeah.
I did my regular radio show on Friday, and we talked about one of the topics we talked about on here. The new normal and stuff. Man, one of the saddest things I realized, and it was a great conversation, was almost nobody trusts anybody in the community.
Right.
The young ones was talking about, the old leadership need to get out of the way. They don't listen and all this other kind of stuff. And it is what it is. And you got to watch out for yourself and that kind of stuff. But at the same breath, we get this kumbaya talk that we want to share, but we need to be real about that,
Yep.
right? And again, I don't have no problem being real about it because if you get real about it, you can do something about it. So now we got 3 or 4 generations. You have young people again
Right.
who their entertainment is terrorizing other people.
Right.
And now that you got people locked down, you ain't got enough people on the street with to feed whatever little embarrassment they have, right? Because there's more eyes on them. Think about that.
Right.
There's more eyes on them. There more people might see them and that kind of stuff. Whoa, man, it's like one of them old movies from recovering after the atom bomb done fell. It's like, oh
Right.
man, every man for himself, and hey man, ain't nobody out here. So now it's almost a different type of
Right.
looting people's soul,
Right.
right? And only living in the moment, living
Yep.
in the moment.
Survival stress management to the
Survival
10th
stress
power.
management. I might feel something afterwards, but in the moment, what is it? I mean, think about it. And make it even worse. Right now, and some people might say find it to be okay, I guess. But now, in parts of the community, we're bold enough to go in communities that we didn't even go in before and terrorize them too.
Hmm.
Somebody was about time to go. No, what the issue is when you got so comfortable that you don't care about how people feel about things, and that's a sign that how do I feel about me? How do I think the world feel about me? Right? And then you add the extra stress of the COVID on top of that, right? Every man for himself or every woman for himself. And then you add on top of that the situation where uh, uh, we had over the summer that continually still exists in terms of the stress between police departments and the community.
Hmm.
You know, yeah, perfect storm, another perfect storm, right? And then if you get into the whole thing about domestic violence, I have I it was before the COVID. I'm always concerned about our community's response to domestic violence. Our community response to domestic violence has been a difficult response, right? And yeah, have been a difficult response because you have the response from at least some of the black men I deal with, but what about me? And you know,
Right.
what she hit me first, and and all this, all these pieces to go along with that, right? And all the pieces to go with that. And so I don't know. I don't know. What's
So
your
so
thought?
yeah, you dropped a lot right there. Greetings to everybody who's joining us. Welcome. As you were talking, I was looking up some of the symptoms of abuse, and let me see if I can do a screen share because this is fascinating. This should be interesting. Can you see that?
See,
Nope, you couldn't see it. Let's see. How do I do this? Nothing popped up for you?
no, no,
No? Okay. Maybe I can't do it because you're the host. But I was attempting to show some of the signs. So I found a list, 64 signs of mental and emotional abuse.
right,
And the first subcategory is humiliation, negating, and criticizing.
right,
And I'm just gonna read off a few on this list, and you tell me where you see these things in the community. Name calling is the first one. Derogatory pet names, character assassination, yelling, patronizing, public embarrassment, which public embarrassment today is both online and literally in public. Dismissiveness, joking, sarcasm, insulting of appearance, belittling your accomplishments, put downs of your interests, and pushing your buttons. Now, all those things, that was like what, 12, maybe? I think maybe about 12 of them. All those things are things that we see within our culture all day, every day that lead to bigger incidents of violence.
right,
When I look at domestic violence situations, being somebody who's worked in domestic programming, work
right,
with you in domestic programming,
right,
what would be some of the things the guys will say why they did what they did? A lot of those things on that list, right?
right,
That those things were happening to them
right.
and they were doing those things as well.
Yeah, yeah. And the only thing is you had to allow them, at least that's what we've done, had to allow them to be able to say that, right?
Right,
And before we can get them to understand they're doing the exact the same thing,
right, right.
right?
Because
And
they've been hurt too.
when they would come to that conclusion was like amazing because you could see it in their face. You're talking about me.
Exactly.
Yep. And now they talking about me is uh 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 when I listen to that list and is that when you were saying it, I had this internal kind of anxiety. We'll tell you why.
Mm,
That's
why?
the way things were dealt in the house I grew up in.
Bingo. And that's just one subcategory. We haven't
Right,
even got to control and shame, accusing, blaming, and denial, neglect, codependency. We haven't even got to those. That's just one area. But yes, those are family dynamics that we have cultivated. We create these things, whether good or bad, that have become self-defeating behaviors.
right,
So at one point in time, these things worked, but in today's time, and even 30 years ago, they weren't effective methods. But we kept them because that's what we knew, and they ultimately have manifested into what we see today.
right, right. It appears that we might have hit a few nerves here and there. Uh, because the thing is, we're talking about, we're real clear. We're talking about right now, uh, our community, right? Not
Yep.
saying that these things don't happen community wide, but
Right.
again, um, when you are in the work and you hear this, I'm not saying that there's not no positive things going on, but the issue is when you get past the surface denials and that kind of stuff, and you get down to the core of the folks you're working with, the biggest piece is fear. And
Right.
fear, the logic is not there, right?
Right.
The logic is not there. And it don't feel good. It's talking about, I think somebody mentioned about the historical reality, right? The historical
Mhm.
reality. Uh, but the issue is there's multiple historical realities, right? If we want to
Right.
include the reality of historical experiences of African Americans in America, okay, that which include the mistreatment by systems, white supremacist systems, and that kind of stuff. But there is also this historical reality, this shorter reality of these 30 years is being honest about the effect that having this crisis going in our community, and not only have the crisis going on in our community, but also have a system attack our community in the name of the crisis they helped develop,
Right.
right? And being honest about what effect it had on children, and
Right.
that them children are adults. And some of those children, those ones who grew up to be adults, passed some of that distrust and that survive at any means necessary kind of mentality down, especially when you don't have no good examples externally to change that, to look upon, right?
Right.
I don't necessarily like that reality, but I see the response of that reality that we have. And it might not be, and I don't think it's a large portion, but it's enough portion to keep chaos going internally, and a
Mhm.
large portion for us to, because of our response to our young people and to our community, for us to see it and then want to, and I can make excuses for it because there is a reason for it, but that don't mean you shouldn't deal with it at the
Right.
same time, right? Because we have a population of young people who do not feel for other folks.
Correct.
They barely
Yeah.
feel for themselves.
Themselves, exactly. Which is why we're seeing suicide rates go up amongst black adolescents.
Well, the suicide rate is just the opposite side of homicide, right?
Homicide.
It's
Right.
like, I remember when they came to me 2 years ago about the suicide rate. What did I think? I said, well, if you got a certain amount of abuse and homicide going in the community, eventually you're gonna have suicide because not all kids are involved in that homicide out there, but they live in that environment, you know.
Right.
And
They
and and
respond to it.
and so now, what am I supposed to feel like when I'm ducking and dodging gunshots, not necessarily bullets, just the shots in some communities, right?
Mhm.
When you got young people, and you ask them, you have a question, did you grow up in a war zone? And I remember the first time I heard one say, yeah.
Mhm.
First one said, yeah. And I
Yeah.
said, why do you? He said, man, I grew up where the gunshots were every night. Or when
Yep.
I had to go to school, I had to keep my eyes and my mind on the swivel, depending on what's going to happen.
Right.
Again, I don't let systems off the hook, but we have to deal with the response. Because again, I will often say, if you deny your trauma, you deny your humanity. And one of the things that we always want to accuse the systems of doing is treating us inhumanely.
Mhm.
And so, And again, when we talk about the crack era, their response to us was it was a war. There was and the idea of treatment and compassion and what I call like to call compassion accountability wasn't even part of the equation.
Right.
And then ironically, some of that wasn't even showing up inside the community.
Hmm.
And so, and then and as a response of the crack era, the response to black women, if they were trying to protect themselves during the crack era, and they happened to kill their abuser, they were getting time. They were getting like nobody wanted to hear, even though you had a list of all the abuses that this person had been experiencing. They were trying to give these women big time,
Right.
right? So now and the other response instead of giving them treatment, because I think there was a couple women in the video who were talking about having their kids taken away from them.
Right.
Wasn't trying to find a way, and we know it's always after the fact. Now we know if we'd have did a better job of trying to work with the parents
Right.
or parent, so that that child could stay with the parent, the level of long term trauma effects would have been less,
Right.
right? Because again, I don't care. That's still my mama. That's still my daddy. That no matter how whatever they do, right?
Right.
Now you take me someplace else with somebody who probably who at that time there was a lot of folks who were foster parents and they was just collecting the dollars.
Correct.
And again, it's like, oh, you're just making that stuff up. No, I've been dealing with clients and young people and young adults who, when they got the opportunity to tell the story, this is their story. I'm not making this stuff up. So, um, yeah. So what we don't went off on the deep end, I guess. Uh, what do you think it will take to? What are some of the things that might not be currently being done, or even things are currently being done that maybe need to be done, increased, or some new things that you think that we could deal with in terms of community violence within our community and the issues around domestic violence?
Yeah, that's a question that has many different areas that need to be addressed. As someone who's managed one of the bigger anti-violent community violence programs in this state, I would say one of the main areas that need to be addressed is we have to have spaces for these males because it's majority males. I have a solution for the females that are involved too here in a second, but we have to have spaces for these males to get stabilized. And what I mean by that is sometimes these guys need to get outside of their normal environment. They need to be, I don't know if it's like a boarding school type situation, which is going to be
Oh,
traumatic. It
oh,
ain't jail
oh,
or group
oh,
homes, but
hey,
these guys need to be removed from the environment. I've had participants who we've helped in so many different ways, but since they're still in the same environment, that culturally there's no shift because they can get the help, but they just stay where they're at. Um, so they need a break from the environment. Now they can come back in once they get what I call quote unquote stabilized,
right,
but they need to break out of that environment because when you're in that environment, um you have developed or cultivated an identity in that environment. And until you're in something different, you can start to think different and act differently. If you're still in the same environment, nothing's necessarily going to change because you're still going to operate how you want to operate. One of the craziest things that I've seen helping these are young black men. We're talking 17, sometimes even younger, 14, 15, 16-year olds to about mid 30s. One thing that's sad is when you got a young black male who's trying to do better, but feel like he can't because he has a target on his back. So even knowing he's trying to get that legit job, even though he's trying to go back to school, he's trying to get that certificate, he's trying to be involved with his family, he can't because next thing you know, he's getting shot at, or people are threatening his baby moms and his family, or they're showing up to his legit job causing problems. Now his employer's looking at him crazy. So he's better off staying in the lifestyle where he knows how to operate and maintain his level of safety and to a certain extent, even his level of comfort, even knowing it's detrimental to him long term. He's willing to stay there because there's no shift in the environment. So that's one thing. Another thing that often gets overlooked, but if we're talking about being more upstream, is we have to have a different educational structure for Black children. And they can go to public school, but we have to have supplemental education. So many of these guys, most because they're mostly men and they're increasingly are females, but so many of the males are illiterate. These guys can't read. They can barely write the damn names when you have them fill out forms. They can barely type. We have to be able to help them with just educational basics. Do you know how much shame is in when you can't read or when we're in group and we're like, okay, let's do a worksheet. I know, Sam, you don't even do worksheets because of this. Because you give them a worksheet and now they're disengaged. There might be 3 questions on the sheet.
Right.
But since they can't read well, they will use behavior due to shame to exit out of the process to working on things, because it's easier for me to say, man, this is some bullshit and just throw the papers on the ground and make a fuss so you can kick me out,
right,
than it is for me to struggle through these 3 sentences and then admit that I can't read.
And
that is hard.
And then what happens is when you don't kick them out and you pull them aside,
right?
They I've had dudes start crying, right?
Yeah.
You
see them.
Yeah. It's like, look, dude, I don't know where you've been, but one of the things, I'm not tolerating that. Okay.
Right.
That I ain't tolerating.
Right.
But we can talk about the other stuff. We can deal with you on the side or whatever. But that craziness you just did, right?
Yeah.
I might be old, but I am crazy. So no, we don't want to play it. And it's unfortunate that you had to have a conversation in that manner to get their attention, right?
Correct. But you got to meet them where they're at, though, because that's how other people get their attention. I mean, you ain't threatening their life, but you got to turn it up a little bit just to connect on the level where now you're meeting them where they're at. Unfortunately, that's where a lot of folks are.
And then you're right. I do give out, worksheets, but what I don't do is I don't do this thing where you call somebody out to read a portion. I don't do
reading.
Yeah. I had some of the folks I've trained. And again, I am flexible enough that I don't only deal with Black men and Black people. I deal with mixed groups and educated groups, and I have a good sense of what they can handle. And even in those, I don't do that as much. Because
that's a more trauma-informed approach to what you're saying right now. Go ahead.
Right. But the other piece is we, at least where I come up from. So we don't irritate everybody. Where I come from, shame was the method of
control. Yeah.
Period.
And ultimately becomes control. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so the thing is nobody, if nobody likes to be shamed, because the thing is what I always hear, especially like with violence, domestic violence, I was disrespected.
Right.
And so the question is, what do you mean by disrespect? They ain't never had nobody ask them that question before.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean disrespect?
Mm-hmm.
Well, she kept bothering me about my video games. And what was disrespectful about that?
Mm-hmm.
Or did you feel bad because she was right? That the baby crying, you don't get up to go deal with the baby, you just call her name.
Right.
Well, what is that? I'm a man stuff. Mm-hmm. Because when you talk about education, man, we just need basic education on how to relate to each other.
Exactly. That's why I said supplemental. Notice I said supplemental education.
Right.
Public school can work.
Right.
But you need to have additional things with it. A lot of that in social emotional intelligence skills.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because the thing is so if you look at a lot of these issues, so many of them relate to the inability to how to relate.
Correct. Which
You
goes to
know,
what I got a couple more points, and that goes to one of my next ones. Go ahead.
how to relate. Not even knowing when I asked them, when have you ever seen a healthy relationship, right?
Right.
And they'll give you examples in the family, right? But
Yep.
it's usually um that family member who they don't have a lot of interaction with,
Correct.
right? That aunt and uncle who you only see during maybe a holiday or a
Right.
family reunion every 5 years, or they got these relationships they heard about, like their grandparents been
Right.
together for 50 years and all this other kind of stuff. And the issue is, but other than those, what has been your example, right?
Right.
And if your example include uh 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 calling each other out of your name, and people would tolerate that, throwing stuff at each other, threatening each other's life, like you got to get out, or
Right.
and all like this, and it's okay, and that feels normal, but the children are scared all the time, because I was that child.
Right.
And then you add in this artificial toxic masculinity. Yes, I said it. Artificial toxic masculinity. You know, what is a man? Is like, please, you know, well, I gotta find a way to take care of my family. Oh yeah, you can take care of your family in jail, right?
Mm.
How about having a conversation? Because we see, we have, in our community, we get caught up into that that white ideal, and some people say it ain't just white, but we things that was done in the old days don't apply
Don't
right
work
now.
anymore.
Circumstances are
Right.
different. How
Right.
how do we learn how to be partners? We can't even be partners with our partners. How are we gonna be partners in a relationship? And how do you and it's awful difficult to be partners in a relationship when your relationship is built on the back of children.
Some of them ain't even that. Some of them is built on, I'm gonna try to get as much as I can get out of you before you get out of me.
Or that's
That's the new
that
generation.
transactional relationships that we see all the time.
The children are just casualties of play.
Oh, see,
Unfortunately.
you gonna get me. You see, man.
I'm
Yeah,
I'm just
all they
keeping it
gonna
real, Sam. Listen.
all they gonna remember is the old Negro. Okay, so uh,
Let me add some more points, because there's actually two questions that I can answer while I'm adding my points. So, like I said, that stabilization phase, being able to remove them from the environment and have them come back in once they get quote unquote stabilized. And when I'm not talking about prison, I'm not talking about boarding schools. It's just an ideal of people need to get out of that environment to return. Sometimes, and I've seen this happen with some people, sometimes that environment's been the military, where people go off to the Air Force and things, and then they come back different.
right,
Now, I'm not, saying I'm pro-military or anything like that, but you just see the difference. Sometimes it's college. Folks
right.
go to college and come back very different because they're out of that normal environment. Sometimes it's just moving to a different city and you're in a different situation. So you see this happen over and over and over again.
But now
The
let me
other,
stop
go
you. Let
ahead.
me stop you.
Go ahead.
Moving to a different city, that one is a little bit more difficult, because what
It
we
is
have a tendency to do is move in a different city, but the same neighborhood.
correct. Same people, same type of folks, right? But sometimes people move with intention to do things differently,
Right,
so they're seeking a whole different environment. But you're right. A lot of us will go from the Twin Cities to Chicago, and it ain't that ain't the switch that you need to make, because you're just gonna be right back in a similar situation. But another thing that needs to be done to help is we have to focus on co-parenting. And what I mean by that, even if you don't have children, you need to learn how to coexist in a dynamic with the individual who has a different parenting style or relationship style than you do. Like, co-parenting is critical. Even if you're in a relationship, you could be married, you still need to work on co-parenting, because our kids, unfortunately, like I said, they become casualties of play, because you got two people who don't have the same expectations in how to parent or when to parent or even how to communicate with each other. And then what ends up happening is the kid gets placed in the middle of this battle between their parents. That
but
has to be worked on. Go ahead.
there's a whole nother level of co-parenting too.
Say
Okay,
that. Share.
because you can say co-parenting between the individuals, the mother and father,
Right.
okay, or mother and
And
stepfather.
grandma.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But now we got you. Now you go in there. Now we
Yeah.
have to figure out how to co-parent with grandma,
Right.
right?
And yep.
And how do you co-parent with grandma and daughter? We ain't even talking about grandma and son-in-law,
Right. And grandma
right?
might be the maternal or the paternal grandma too, because
Right.
that changes the dynamic as
Right.
well.
So again, it still come back down to how do we learn how to teach folks how to relate to each other without all this anxiety and chaos, right?
Right.
You
Right.
know, and when you say co-parenting, we got a lot of folks who might have been married, been in relationships and whatever, and you older and you connect with somebody,
Right.
right? Older now, you're talking about how do grandparents co-parent,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
I mean, so again, is how do we start building relationships?
Correct.
And what does that look like?
That are
Right?
constructive and healthy relationships.
And,
Right.
and, and you can't do that by all or nothing and keep telling me about the good old days,
Right.
right? Don't tell me about when they, man, I used to get beaten. I turned out this fine. Who told you that? I mean, it's this boggles my mind how hard it is, and actually I understand it really, but how hard it is that certain truths for us is for so hard for us to handle.
Right.
Especially when we get to talking about us, right? Now, when we was talking about them, oh man, we be on and popping, but 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 the healing or the new day is going to start with us dealing with some real tough truths. We
Yeah.
can get into why our young people are having difficulty in school. It's not the schools are not set up for folks coming out of certain environments. It's just not.
That's very correct.
Okay. Matter of fact, schools ain't set up for a lot of kids, no matter what color they come from.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then if you grow up with all this chaos at home, going to school is just someplace to hang out.
Yeah. It's a disconnect.
So the thing is we always want to talk about the good old days, and I'm not saying that there ain't no good things out of the good old days. Like, for example, when we were able to go to school, it was, look, you going to school to learn. You ain't going to school for no popularity or whatever, right? And then if
Mhm.
you was going to a white school, okay, that white teacher gonna act a fool or whatever, but remember why you there.
Mhm.
And making it okay to be smart.
Mhm.
And because again, we've been shamed as a people for so long. We done took on shame in such a way that it just shows up, right? I even have
Right.
to watch. I had to learn that about myself.
Right.
So I haven't always been perfect with my daughter, but again, I know that there was times that it's like, whoa, that sounds like mom in them,
Right.
and that ain't even cool at all. Luckily, we had a relationship and still do that. If that was messed up, she'd tell me that
Right.
no, because I actually would talk to her about how I grew up and the
Mhm.
things that happened, right,
Mhm.
and that kind of thing. How do we learn to evolve in relationship? How do we learn
Right.
to evolve in terms of why it's got to be a big me, little you? Why do I have to build my masculinity on the back of a female?
Correct.
Which brings up a whole nother. See, we always
That's
get
that's
good almost.
that's a 4-part podcast series. So just wait on that because
Yeah, and now
there's a couple dimensions on that one.
why we do that at the end, because
But I'll say one thing to close us out and to answer both Val's question and Prince's question. So Prince's question was, is there a way to build trust between old black leadership and new black leadership? And Val asked about what happens during the stabilization phase. One of my suggestions or strategies I think that can help is for young black folks to have apprenticeships. And what I mean by that is being shown how to do stuff, no matter what their educational level is. We always go to mentoring, and I have had all type of feedback from me saying that mentoring doesn't work. I wrote an article, it went viral about how mentoring doesn't work in the Black community. And what I was saying in the article, the headline was just to grab you in, but I wasn't saying mentoring is bad. What I'm saying is we are at a place and space with Black young people that mentoring a young Black person isn't enough. You also have to show them how to operate in this world. So
Right.
with new Black leadership needs to show, or sorry, old Black leadership needs to show new Black leadership how to operate, but new Black leadership needs to show old Black leadership how to use their principles in today's time. There's a crossover. But old Black leadership doesn't see that. They see that they've made it to a level, and you need to, like just like parenting, you need to be seen and not heard. So
Right.
shut up and let me show you how to do this. That don't work, and that's why our leadership isn't as effective as it can be, because we have two generations with two different cultural viewpoints on how to get things done, and they need to collaborate instead of bump heads amongst each other. So that's also a part of this stabilization phase. Go ahead, sir.
Well, but you also got to understand. Remember, the new leaders, young leadership are in their. A lot of them are in their. They might be younger, but a lot of them are in their late
Early,
20s, 30s,
early
or whatever.
30s. Yeah, my,
And,
my generation.
yeah, and a lot of them don't want to. They don't want to hear nothing from us.
There's a reason for that, because
I
we feel this.
understand.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that there ain't no reason
Get
for
into
it.
it.
Yeah. They don't want to hear from us. And then you got some of our older leadership that have built their self-esteem and self-worth about being a leader.
Correct.
Okay. So so again, the idea of stepping down, who will I be? Right? It's like when I used to be a gangster, when I was Uncle Big, right?
Mhm.
Um, Before I was Uncle Big, I was just another brother who worked every day and you know, probably scared their own shadow and that other kind of noise and that kind of, and then got to be Uncle Big. And when, like being Uncle Big, when I showed up, unless there was an Uncle Bigger, I was the man when I walked in the room, right?
Right.
I had power because I had access to the best drugs. I had power because I was surrounded by some of the prettiest women, even though everybody assumed that I was going to bed with all them. Man, that was too much work. I mean, I'm not trying to do all that, but it looked
Mhm.
good. I played the game, right? Once I
Mhm.
stopped being Uncle Big, nobody know me. Who am I now?
Right. Identity. Yep.
Right. And so the thing is if not being willing to back up, you know, and lead from behind, and as a person in leadership, as an elder, be that be that advisor, that whisper, leadership or whisper, because some young folks, because they done been embarrassed and because they've been diminished, that kind of stuff, you have to be a leadership whisperer because some of them, because of the lack of trust, they can't handle direct, right? At least
Right.
initially, right?
Right.
You know, and you support them quietly, right? So there's lessons to be learned because, and again, when we ask these questions and we don't understand how these questions are affected by the framework of trauma, then we're gonna miss each other, right? Because both sides are, their trauma is showing up, right?
Correct. Correct.
And when you
Amen.
got the trauma showing up, trauma affects how we hear things. I might be asking you for help, and you might hear me say, "I want your stuff," right?
Exactly.
You know, and so, or you might be saying to me, you know, man, Mr. Mr. Simmons, I need your help and all. What you need my help for, right?
Right.
You know, you wasn't trying, and we don't. We're so unforgiving. You wasn't trying to hear me last week, but they got to do it now.
Right.
So you got all in your feelings and stuff. That ain't no different than what you accuse young people doing in the street. It's the same thing.
Correct.
It's a full
Correct.
circle, right? You all in your feelings over some words, not being able to step back, and it's hard. I know I mess with you all the time, about that kind of stuff. Learn stuff, and then you go off, make all the money, don't send me a dime. It's like, you know,
Hey man,
oh,
hey, stop pocket watching.
hey, we get people do that all the time.
Oh,
Because and we're gonna go a little over, but the thing is, when you talk about that mentorship, I know that we used to talk about that a lot, and they like, man, I ain't
yeah.
got no time for this, because young people be watching what you do,
Right. Role
right?
modeling is important.
Yeah,
Right.
and being consistent and that kind of stuff, and I know there's a lot more folks who follow what I do than I really, I hope I ain't guiding them badly or whatever. But again, is I just, do what I do, keep it moving. I'm not trying to be bigger than you. I just want you to be the best of you, right?
Correct.
And
Right.
and you got to get to a level of healing to be able to see that. And
Correct.
again, much as folks in our community don't want to have this real conversation about trauma, everything we talked about today has a trauma connection.
Correct.
Everything.
Right. You know, it's often said that black people are not monolithic. But one thing that is monolithic about us is trauma. It's it's us, man. Look, and we have to be able to understand how to continue to move forward in spite of being victimized by this system, by white supremacy. We have to look at how do we deal with the trauma that we have accumulated over time because our children depend on it. And if we don't, they're going to continue in generation after generation after generation is going to continue to suffer in pain. So, with that, any final words from you, Sam?
No, man, I want to thank all the folks who tuned in today and all the folks who hopefully will tune in later. And um, and even your suggestions and even when it you might have not agreed with whatever we were saying, I appreciate all of that because that's
Yeah.
called dialogue. And we hope to see y'all next week.
Be sure to subscribe to Hillen Brothers podcast on YouTube. If you like the episode, make sure that you share it and come back next Sunday, 3 p.m. Central Standard Time for another installment of the Hillen Brothers podcast. We're out. Peace.